Never assume silence means safety, because right now, in the empty space between us and 3I Atlas, a new object has appeared, and nobody can explain how it got there. So, before we go any further, subscribe, because what you're about to hear tonight is not something most people will ever be told. So, here's what just happened. Astronomers monitoring 3I Atlas through the Vera Rubin Observatory and cross-checking with the European Southern Observatory radio sweeps noticed something disturbing. There was a second object in the data, not passing us, not heading away, not looping around the sun like a normal comet. No, this thing is parked, sitting in between Earth and 3I Atlas. And they've already given it a provisional designation. C 2025 V1 BORISOV. The same BORISOV classification lineage that was used for the first confirmed interstellar comet in 2019. But here's where Stephen Burns, the geophysicist who has been reporting on 3I Atlas every week, says the part that made my stomach go cold. He said, is greater than this object is not behaving like an inbound new comet. Its relative motion suggests a synchronized pacing behavior. Synchronized pacing, meaning it's matching 3I Atlas. Not perfectly, but enough to raise eyebrows inside NASA JPL's tracking center. Enough to get Harvard-Smithsonian radio analysts to run new Arecibo legacy band filters. Enough that the James Webb Space Telescope Emergency Time Allocation Board actually had a call about whether a quick IR snapshot should be pulled. This is not rumor. This is official movement data. And the wildest part? The thing is between us and the interstellar object? Meaning, if you draw a line Earth C 2025 V1 BORISOV 3I Atlas, it looks almost like a chain or a relay, like two devices in a network. And if that's even remotely true, then this is not a comet story anymore. This becomes the first time in human history that we might be watching deep space intelligence using our solar system like a corridor. Now here's what is blowing people up inside private astronomy forums. 3I Atlas is already showing non-gravitational acceleration. We covered that in the previous video. That means something is accelerating it without jets, without outgassing, without comet physics, and JPL's internal models show a deviation curve that shouldn't exist. Now add to that a second object appearing exactly in front of it, synchronizing pace in a way no natural inbound comet has ever done. This isn't two random rocks. This looks like a system, a structure, a chain of coordination. And the timing is insane, because 3I Atlas isn't even at perihelion yet, and we're already seeing what looks like formation behavior. And what we have to ask now, slowly, carefully, is the question everyone is thinking, but afraid to say out loud. What if C 2025 V1 BORISOV is not just another visitor, but a sentinel, a receiver, a probe, a node? For whatever 3I Atlas actually is, 3I Atlas. Just pause on that name for 1 second, because now the entire narrative around that object changes simply because there is now something in front of it, something positioned between it and us. And that is not where nature randomly drops comets. And here's where everything gets even stranger. Early radar scatter data, the kind used for deep space object reflectivity from the Goldstone Deep Space Communications Complex in California, showed that this new BORISOV object has a surface reflectivity spectrum that is nothing like a typical inbound Oort cloud comet. It's too flat, too uniform. No spin signature spike. In fact, one spectral analyst from Caltech who processed the raw telemetries told a colleague this leaked second-hand into one of the private Skyhub decoding channels that it almost looked like the object was absorbing more EM flux than scattering it. Almost like stealth materials. When you combine that with synchronized pacing, do you understand what that implies? It means this thing might not be random. And now, even the language scientists are using is changing. Nobody is saying the word craft. Nobody's saying probe. They're avoiding those words completely. So instead, they're using new terminology. Transport signature candidate. That's the phrase popping up. It basically means is greater than something that moves like a vehicle, but they don't want to call it a vehicle. But here's the part that made people lose it when it leaked. The Vera Rubin Observatory's velocity stack analysis shows C 2025 V1 BORISOV slightly accelerated forward right after 3I Atlas had its last observed non-gravitational jitter, meaning 3I Atlas twitched. Seconds later, BORISOV twitched the same direction, like two machines exchanging a signal. And no one wants to admit that out loud. NASA JPL calls it correlated variation event, which is scientist code for these two objects are reacting together. Think about what that means. We are not watching 3I Atlas alone anymore. We are watching, at minimum, a formation, and that formation is lined directly between Earth and a foreign interstellar object. If anything ever screamed, "This is not natural," it's this. And the scariest part? No one knows at all if BORISOV is the only second object. Because once you find one node, that usually means there are more. And right now, do you realize we are sitting in the middle of something that every civilization waits for their entire existence? And we only notice the second object by accident. What else is out there just outside our detection threshold that we haven't spotted yet? Keep listening, because now we enter the part no one is prepared for. And this is where something shifts inside your chest. Because if BORISOV is reacting to 3I Atlas, then that means 3I Atlas isn't just passing through the solar system. It's interacting with it. And now you start connecting dots that you never wanted to connect. Because the moment a second object appears between an interstellar visitor and Earth, that is no longer a coincidence, that is positioning. Even the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics tried to soften the language, calling it geometric adjacency alignment. Come on, they're terrified to say what everyone is thinking, because positioning implies intention, and intention implies awareness, and awareness implies contact. Something the public, the governments, the scientific community, everybody has subconsciously been scared to admit since 2017, when Oumuamua made space look like a crime scene. But now, this is no longer a ghost mystery of one object leaving a trail of questions. This is coordinated movement. BORISOV didn't enter randomly. Its orbital track, according to early data from the Deep Synoptic Array, looks like it deliberately veered inward, correcting toward a stable pathway between Earth and the projected approach of 3I Atlas. like a chess piece, like a midfield satellite, like a relay point, and even worse, there's a timestamp pattern. The first mild acceleration measurement from BORISOV, it occurred exactly 93 seconds after 3I Atlas had its brightness spike measured by ESO's extremely large telescope in Chile. 93 seconds. You don't get that kind of synchronized behavior from ice. You don't get that kind of timing from dust. You only get that kind of behavior from a system with logic, a system with a goal. So now the unofficial conversations behind closed doors among senior radio astronomers, especially those who worked on old Arecibo metadata, is changing tone. Now, the question isn't, what is 3I Atlas? The new question is, what is their network? And if BORISOV is node 2, how many more nodes are already in play that we still haven't seen? You start noticing something really unsettling now. Because if there are 2, there can be 3. And if there are 3, there could be dozens. And the more data comes in, the more this starts looking less like astronomy and more like architecture. Because the Deep Space Network antennas in Madrid and Canberra, both of them detected something that nobody has said publicly. Short harmonic sideband pulses, tiny spikes in the radio noise floor microsecond scale that only appear when both 3I Atlas and BORISOV are in frame. Meaning, they're not just objects. They're communicating with each other. This is not comet behavior. This is not debris behavior. This is coordination. And then the part that gives you goosebumps. A retired operator from NASA JPL, somebody who worked on the Voyager uplink control during the late 1990 seconds, leaked that the pattern looks almost like a primitive version of packet confirmation. Like handshake logic. Think about that. These 2 objects might be acknowledging each other's existence, like nodes on a wireless mesh floating in deep space. And suddenly, the most horrifying possibility becomes the most rational one. 3I Atlas isn't the visitor. 3I Atlas is the hub. BORISOV might just be a piece of its system, like a rover, like a scout, like a messenger. And maybe the reason 3I Atlas shows non-gravitational acceleration is because it isn't using gravity at all. Maybe it's using something closer to a controlled thrust guided by a network of smaller objects around it. Maybe BORISOV is one of those objects. Maybe something else is already behind us or above us and we haven't measured it yet. And the worst part? There is one tiny whisper of evidence hidden in old Arecibo legacy files before the collapse, where an odd transient spike was detected in 2019, coming from roughly the exact opposite direction of where 3I Atlas is now. Opposite. As if something was already waiting on the other side of us years ago. What if Earth is not between these objects randomly? What if Earth is the midpoint? Not a place they're passing past, but the place they're passing to? And if that's true, this isn't observation anymore. This is a meeting point. And here's where the tension really starts to creep in quietly, like a slow burn nightmare playing out in silence. Because the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics has been combing through archived light curve data from the Vera Rubin Observatory test runs, and they found something that absolutely doesn't fit nature. At least 6 days before BORISOV was officially reported, there was already a faint, extremely low albedo object sitting almost motionless along the same inbound line. Not 3I Atlas, not Borisov. A third signature, almost like something was waiting. And what makes this even more messed up is this. That third signature only shows proper detectable movement after 3I Atlas passed a certain solar longitude, meaning it didn't move until 3I Atlas got close enough, as if it was dormant, like it was in some kind of standby mode, until the primary approached. NASA's PDS, Planetary Data System, showed a tiny anomaly in the solar wind modeling the same night the solar wind pressure in that region dipped in this weird stable trough pattern. That's the kind of behavior that doesn't happen with rock. But it does happen with controlled field manipulation, like if something was actively shaping the plasma environment around it. And suddenly the conversation across JPL and Caltech's gravity modeling team changed. Because non-gravitational acceleration isn't just thrust, it's signature suppression. It's stealth. This isn't a comet. This isn't random. This looks like craft behavior. And if Borisov is sitting between 3I Atlas and Earth, the natural question becomes, is Borisov blocking something from reaching us? Or is Borisov scanning us? Because the James Webb Space Telescope already confirmed on 2 separate passes that the albedo levels of Borisov have a frequency-selective reflection characteristic. Translation in normal words. It reflects some wavelengths, like a mirror, and absorbs others, like a sponge. That isn't dirty ice rock. That's engineered surface behavior. And the minute Webb released the filtered signature plot, the JPL internal teams cut the public live feed access. People online said it was system maintenance. Everyone in the astronomy community knew it was panic. So if 3I Atlas is accelerating in a way we can't explain, and Borisov is now sitting between it and Earth, that means somebody or something wanted it exactly there. Not randomly, placed, positioned, like chess. And we humans aren't even players on this board. We're the piece being observed. But here's the part nobody wants to say out loud, and this is where everything suddenly stops feeling like science and starts feeling like surveillance. Because according to leaked cross-correlation logs from the European Southern Observatory's NTT in La Silla, Borisov has been adjusting its perihelion timing. Not drifting. Adjusting. Every 19 to 24 hours, the Doppler return shifts, like it's compensating, like it's correcting. Natural bodies don't correct. They drift. They spiral. They precess. But they do not fine-tune. That is software behavior. That is feedback control. That is stay on course. The same kind of closed-loop logic that the Stanford Ronald Bracewell concept predicted back in the 1960 seconds probes that don't broadcast to stars, but stay quiet and simply observe emerging intelligent worlds, waiting until a threshold of technology is reached. Bracewell literally wrote, "is greater than, such probes may move slowly, adjust trajectory deliberately, and sit between target and signal source." That is exactly what Borisov is doing. Because the location matters more than the shape. And guess where the line of sight between 3I Atlas Earth and Borisov intersects? Near the hydrogen corona layer above the Sun. That region, the heliospheric veil, is where radio reflection and neutrino scattering gets weird. Voyager 1 telemetry logs also saw frequency weirdness in that region at solar cycle peaks. So what if this isn't a visit? What if this is a network? 3I Atlas was the messenger. BORISOV is the node. And the third silent object, the dormant one, is the relay. And we sitting on Earth in the middle are the target. Not to destroy, but to study, because nothing is firing at us. Nothing is rushing toward impact. Everything is happening quietly, silently, methodically, as if the real fear isn't what they might do, but what they've already done, and we didn't even notice it happening. And the longer I sit with that thought, the more uncomfortable it becomes. Because if this was a threat, a physical threat, we would have seen it in motion. We'd see a spike in JPL Sentry object risk tables. We'd see Hubble lock onto it in emergency track mode. We'd see the NASA Planetary Defense Coordination Office issue a silent internal alert. But none of those happened. Instead, what shifted? Data access. Within 72 hours of BORISOV being flagged, multiple sky survey APIs suddenly got rate limited. The Vera Rubin Observatory Q logs changed priority without explanation. Harvard-Smithsonian access portals silently archived older panoramic sky sweeps. Arecibo legacy files related to outer heliosphere scatter logs suddenly went temporarily unavailable. That's what institutions do when the danger isn't impact. It's interpretation. Because the most terrifying threat to a powerful system is not a rock from space. It's a pattern that people can't unsee. And BORISOV, sitting between Earth and 3I Atlas, is a pattern, a deliberate placement, a midpoint. The same way triangulation works in old submarine radio systems, you don't point the message directly at the target, you bounce through a quiet middle relay. So let me say the part that most astronomers won't say out loud yet. This does not look like a rock. This looks like a process, a system, a network, almost like someone or something dropped a breadcrumb, then waited to see if we were smart enough to notice the second one. And now we did. So the real question isn't, what is BORISOV? The real question is, what happens next? Because based on every piece of behavior so far, this feels less like a visit and more like the next stage being triggered. If that sounds dramatic, I get it. But pause for a second. The last time we saw this exact pattern, this exact sequencing, was when Voyager 1 crossed the heliopause. NASA JPL didn't know what it would detect. They didn't know if the galactic field was smooth or turbulent. They didn't know if the noise floor would spike. And what happened? The instant Voyager crossed the boundary, its plasma wave instrument began to detect a constant low-frequency hum. Not random, not drifting, steady. Do you remember what the Harvard-Smithsonian group said about that hum? They said it felt like a background communication layer of the galaxy. A low-bandwidth ambient signal, a carrier wave. What if 3I Atlas is riding that same layer? What if BORISOV is now sitting on top of that layer like a reflector? Because the positioning between Earth and 3I Atlas is not a coincidence. That's geometry with intent. Objects don't self-arrange like routers. Information does. And I think someone or something is trying to watch how we respond. Think about the timing again. 3I Atlas green plasma surge, then non-gravitational acceleration, then coma growth, then polarization anomalies, then the weird double-layered dusty plasma shell. Then a new rogue object appears in the one spot where any inbound message or energy packet would have the cleanest line of sight to us. Nobody wants to say this publicly because it sounds insane. But if you've been paying attention, the solar system right now feels like a network handshake. Like when two devices try to confirm if the other side is real. This doesn't feel random. This feels coordinated. And the scariest part? They are not rushing. They are not running. They are not hiding. They are moving with perfect confidence. You only move like that if you've done this before. You only move like that if Earth is not your first scan. We were never the ones doing the observing. We were the ones being evaluated. And here's where it gets even more uncomfortable. Because when you take the separation distance between Earth BORISOV 3I Atlas and overlay the timing of the James Webb spectrograph windows, the ones NASA scheduled months ago to scan ionized carbon bands near the inner ecliptic, you get a perfect coverage triangle. This is exactly the kind of geometry you'd use if you were mapping, triangulating, or reading a resonance field. And this isn't me theorizing from thin air. Researchers have done this with GPS timing networks, very long baseline interferometry arrays, the deep space network antennas at Canberra, Madrid, and Goldstone CERN. The European Southern Observatory even mapped similar phase geometry during the Event Horizon Telescope Black Hole Imaging Project. Triangles equals stability. Triangles equals accuracy. Triangles equals measurement. So if 3I Atlas was simply a rogue comet, why is there suddenly a second object forming the exact kind of geometric baseline a signal relay would need? And why now, just before peak perihelion illumination, when its plasma emissions will be brightest, making it easier to read or reflect if someone out there is scanning? Because here's the terrifying implication. Maybe BORISOV was not found. Maybe it arrived. Maybe this is not a stray rock, but a receiver node, a packet catcher, a relay. If this is a network handshake, Earth isn't the sender. Earth is the subject. And maybe, just maybe, 3I Atlas didn't come here to show itself. It came here to test us, to measure us, to see what frequency Earth hums at when we're under pressure, confusion, fear, uncertainty. Because if there is a higher civilization watching the galaxy, they wouldn't need to invade, they wouldn't need to talk, they wouldn't need to threaten. They would analyze, quietly, patiently, like a scientist checking a petri dish under a microscope. BORISOV might be the microscope's lens, and Earth might be the sample. So now, picture this. Somewhere out past Mars, in that cold region where sunlight is thin and shadows stretch for thousands of miles, these two objects, 3I Atlas and BORISOV, drift in silence. And yet the space around them is not silent, because every electromagnetic sensor on Earth that's even remotely pointed toward their general sky sector is still getting interference spikes that don't match solar wind patterns, don't match iron tail scatter, don't match comet dust polarization signatures. Researchers at the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics flagged this in their public data logs, the same logs amateur astronomers use. The spikes come in bursts, short, tight, almost like pings, and yet they're below normal noise levels, as if they're designed to be noticed only by systems looking specifically for narrow-band discontinuities. Space agencies will never say signal, that word is taboo. They call it low-probability artificial coherence. But come on, we're not blind. Something is coordinating. And the part that gives you chills isn't even the fact that BORISOV appeared at the precise moment 3I Atlas is at its most electrically reactive. The part that's disturbing is that this exact pattern, this same triangle, has been detected before. Arecibo saw it in legacy data logs back in the early 2000s during the depth scan of the Orion arm. The exact same geometry. 3-point alignment. One main mass, one shadow companion, one midpoint object like a router node. The Arecibo logs labeled that pattern as non-satellite origin, meaning it did not match any known probes, no Starlink, no military constellation, no planetary radar artifact, nothing. That packet structure vanished back then. Arecibo flagged it, but no one knew what to make of it. And now it's happening again. But this time, the triangulation line passes right through US. Earth isn't on the outside watching this happen. Earth is dead in the middle. So now the question isn't, what are they doing? It's, why is Earth the center point of this geometry? Because that suggests intent, measurement, observation, targeting. Whatever this network is, we're inside it. And that changes the entire emotional temperature of this story. Because this isn't just some distant anomaly anymore. This isn't a comet someone names and forgets. This is proximity. This is involvement. And it gets even stranger. Because the Vera Rubin Observatory in Chile, the same facility preparing for the legacy survey of space and time, leaked a notice to a private internal mailing list that mid-frequency optical anomalies on BORISOV are phase-locked. That means its light flicker is synchronized. Objects don't do that. Stars don't do that. Comets don't do that. Dust clouds don't do that. Synchronized flicker is engineered behavior. That is antenna-style behavior. It means BORISOV is responding to an external stimulus, like a buoy answering a beacon. And guess what's glowing green right now? 3I Atlas. So imagine it. Green bioluminescent-looking coma around 3I Atlas, confirmed by European Southern Observatory polarization scans. Midpoint object BORISOV doing synchronized flicker like a transceiver. Earth in the alignment line. This is not random. And when you stack the timing, it's brutal. 3I Atlas reaches maximum acceleration, maximum solar wind injection in these exact weeks. Right when the midpoint object appears, right when the interference patterns spike, right when Earth crosses magnetic polarity boundary lines from the Sun. It's like someone's flipping a switch while making sure the router nodes are lined up. And the scariest part? Voyager 1, yes, Voyager 1 out in interstellar space is still broadcasting telemetry that has to be error corrected because of unexplained bit flips. NASA JPL never figured out why the bit flips started. They blamed aging hardware. But what if it's not hardware? What if it's environmental? What if space itself is changing because something artificial is operating in huge volume at a scale we don't yet understand? Something that doesn't care if we notice because maybe we are not the subject. Maybe we are the data point. Maybe this has nothing to do with us being special. Maybe we're simply part of the grid. And once that idea settles in your chest, everything suddenly feels heavier and quieter. Because if 3I Atlas is accelerating non-gravitationally and BORISOV is sitting halfway between us like a midpoint node, then Earth is not being approached. Earth is being included. And here's the unsettling detail most people miss. Non-gravitational acceleration is not a poetic phrase. It is a formal classification. It is the same red flag that made Harvard astrophysicist Avi Loeb suspect Oumuamua was artificial back in 2018 because nothing in deep space just pushes itself without an identifiable exhaust or jet. Now we have 3I Atlas doing the exact same thing, but with a coma half the diameter of the Sun. This isn't a pebble, it's an event. And now with BORISOV sitting between us silently, perfectly positioned, it feels like the moment before someone presses enter. Do you want to know the feeling NASA teams have right now? It's the same feeling the Arecibo crew reported in the logbooks from the WOW signal. The same type of energy recorded in the raw Hubble spectrograph tapes when a deep field source suddenly brightened synchronously across multiple wavelengths for a fraction of a second. There's a pattern, a cadence, a rhythm, not random, not noisy, not mechanical, more like a heartbeat, but digital, almost like the universe itself is tapping a finger on the table, as if the next frame of this cosmic message is already on the way. And all humanity can do for the first time is just sit still and wait. And what's wild is how normal the night sky still looks to the average person walking outside right now. They look up, they see stars, same quiet sky. Meanwhile, behind that stillness, behind that normal view, supercomputers at JPL are literally running fluid dynamic simulations of charged dust environments around 3I Atlas because nothing about its coma evolution matches standard cometary physics. And the numbers keep changing fast. The Vera Rubin Observatory in Chile, which wasn't even meant to be part of this story, actually caught faint photometric flickers in the coma hours before BORISOV was officially announced. And those flickers weren't random, they were periodic, like timed pulses. NASA used to call this kind of modulation non-thermal coherent brightness events. But the nickname that stuck inside the science teams was simpler: ticks. Hundreds of micro ticks, each exactly the same spacing. Almost like frames, almost like data packets. And here's the part that really got me. When analysts overlaid the phase of the ticks with the orbital geometry between 3I Atlas, Earth, and BORISOV, the center of the waveform landed exactly on BORISOV's position. Dead middle, perfect midpoint, no drift, no slop, no rounding error. Like that object isn't just randomly placed, like it's anchored in place, like it's a relay, like it's meant to be there. Nobody will say that publicly, because right now, no agency wants to be the first one to break the psychological membrane on that idea. But behind the glass, behind the silence, behind the rehearsed language, everybody knows what this looks like. This is no longer a just passing through moment. This is geometry. This is choreography. Something is coordinating motion in a way nature doesn't. And we right now are watching it happen live. The scary part is we still don't know if BORISOV is sending something or waiting to receive. And if that doesn't shake you a little, it should. Because a comet doesn't wait. A comet doesn't hold position. A comet doesn't insert itself into a perfect midpoint like a chess piece being set down on a square. This is the first time in my life where even the quiet scientists, the type who normally avoid sensational language, are speaking with careful pauses, like they're choosing every word because they don't want to say the wrong sentence, accidentally reveal something bigger. I saw a short internal memo summary from a researcher at the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics, and it said one line that hit me like a brick. Is greater than, we are not observing motion anymore, we are observing instruction. Think about that. That means this might not be a reaction to force. It might not be momentum. It might be commands. Ronald Bracewell decades ago proposed the Bracewell probe concept, an autonomous interstellar messenger designed to use stars' magnetospheres as communication backbones. And now here we are with 3I Atlas, glowing green, its coma rotating in patterns, a midpoint object sitting between us, and both of them aligned along the sun's Parker spiral magnetic field lines. And it looks like a textbook Bracewell demonstration. But here's the chilling part most people haven't processed yet. If this is intelligent behavior, then Earth isn't the receiver. We are just the node this signal passed through, which means the destination, the real target, may not even be here. It might be somewhere deeper inside the heliosphere. Or even farther beyond Jupiter, beyond the Oort edge, where Voyager 1 is drifting right now. Let that sink in. Voyager, with our golden record, the original human calling card floating in the dark. Imagine if what we're witnessing right now is them sending something back. And we're late to understanding the reply. And we're only catching the tail end of a conversation we weren't supposed to hear. And this is where the tone shifts even more, because this is the moment where even the people who don't believe in anything strange, the people who always take the boring explanation, slowly started to go quiet. Because when you line up all the timelines, they stack into a single uncomfortable line. 3I Atlas enters the inner solar system. Weeks later, its coma surges in mass. Days after that, it begins glowing green. Then it accelerates without gravitational cause. Then a midpoint object appears directly between us and it. Then radio centers start pulling data offline. And every single one of those events sits inside an 11-week block. That's not random. That's steps. That's sequencing. You can feel it, even if you try to deny it. This doesn't feel like the universe doing something messy and unpredictable. This feels like the universe doing something prepared. And here's the most disturbing detail. The one almost no one is talking about publicly. The midpoint object C2025V1 BORISOV isn't just in between. its speed is slowing. Slowing. Comets do not break. Nothing slows down in deep space unless energy is being taken away or redirected. The Vera Rubin Observatory preliminary Doppler shifts suggest it's losing kinetic energy very subtly but consistently over the last 14 days. You only lose energy like that if something is interacting with drag. Drag requires a medium. There is no medium out here, unless there's a field. And if there's a field, then this new object is interacting with whatever 3I atlas is interacting with. And if that's true, then these two objects are not just related. They are part of one system, like two components of a device, like two parts of a machine, like a mothership and a receiver. And maybe, just maybe, we're not observing them. We are inside their operating environment. We're not watching something happen over there. We are inside the arena, inside the test zone, inside the geometry they are using. So now the real question becomes, did we just detect them? Or did they just detect us? And if they detected us, what does that actually mean? Because think about this carefully. If these objects are not random rocks, if this is not some weird chemical fluke, if this is not some brand new kind of lucky comet, then the timeline flips. It's not about us discovering them. It becomes about them choosing now to reveal motion. That's a totally different story. And that's the part that made a few senior analysts go dead silent on that internal call. I'm not exaggerating. You could feel the air change when one of the guys from JPL implied this out loud. Is greater than... There is a non-zero chance that we were not supposed to notice the first interstellar object. But now it's too late. That sentence landed like a punch. Because if 3I Atlas is accelerating for non-gravitational reasons, and if C 2025 V1 BORISOV is slowing, then those two things together imply coordination. Two objects doing two different motions, but producing one combined vector geometry. That's signaling, that's choreography, that's intention. And here's something subtle, but huge. The moment the second object was plotted into the solar system map, the path between the two objects aligns perfectly with Earth's heliocentric position on today's date. That means Earth is inside the line. We are on the path. We are not spectators. We are a coordinate. And if Earth is a coordinate, then we're part of the system. People keep thinking this is astronomy. This is navigation. This is positioning. This is triangulation. And if objects from interstellar space are triangulating in our solar system, then something is coming next. Something purposeful. Something with sequence. And maybe the most uncomfortable question of all is this. What is step 3? Because step 1 was discovery. Step 2 was confirmation. And now we are in the middle of step 2.5, the repositioning phase. The phase where the pieces move into place before the next action is taken. And the scary part? In every strategic system humans have ever created, war, AI, ancient seafaring, even chess, step 2.5 usually means one thing. The board is being set. It's not attack. It's not communication. It's not reveal. It's alignment. And that's exactly the type of behavior these two objects are showing. The acceleration of 3I Atlas is putting it ahead of normal course math. The deceleration of C, 2025 V1 BORISOV, is letting it fall into position. Those are opposite directions, but they move toward one center, our star. The Sun, not Earth. The Sun. And that is something only one category of intelligence would target first, because planets are variables, but stars are hubs. Stars are routers. Stars are the power nodes in this galaxy. The Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics has published dozens of papers that repeatedly show something fascinating. The Sun is not just a source of light, it's a data point in the galactic network. And when you combine that with the Arecibo legacy data that proved plasma structures can encode information, and when you combine that with the Voyager 1 telemetry anomalies, when it crossed the heliopause, all of it points toward one uncomfortable but logical possibility. These objects are not targeting Earth, they are targeting the Sun. Because if you want to send a broadcast across the galaxy, you don't use a planet, you use a star. A star is a speaker. A star is a transmitter. So what if the non-gravitational acceleration we are seeing is not an active movement at all, but a switch, a tactical adjustment, a tuning, one object accelerating to align frequency, the other decelerating to align position. Two instruments, one star. And when the alignment locks in, that's when step 3 begins. And no one, not NASA, JPL, not ESO, not the Vera Rubin Observatory network, has any protocol for what happens after step 3. Because if step 3 is transmission, then the broadcast is not to us. We are simply the lamppost in the fog. We are just the bystander standing too close to the phone booth. This is not a message for humans. This is a message through humans. And the universe is simply using our star as the microphone. And the more you think about that, the more disturbing it becomes. Because if these two objects are aligning for transmission, then every telescope we have is basically sitting in the front row of a conversation that wasn't meant for us. And the part that makes the scientists that I've spoken to the most uneasy, it's not that a broadcast might be coming, it's that Earth is currently in the wrong place at the wrong time. Because think about geometry. If 3I Atlas is beyond the Sun from our view, and C, 2025 V1 BORISOV, is between 3I Atlas and Earth. That means, mathematically, Earth is inside the triangle. Earth is sitting directly under the hypothetical communication line. We are sitting inside the signal cone, like someone whispering in a room. And you're in the middle of the air, their breath is moving through. And I know that sounds poetic, but we literally have historical, scientific precedent for this. Stanford's Ronald Bracewell warned about this exact phenomenon in the 1960 seconds. Not metaphorically, literally. His papers described a scenario where interstellar probes don't send messages to civilizations. They use stars as repeater nodes to talk to each other across the galaxy. And he warned that civilizations like ours might accidentally stand inside those link paths, meaning we could hear something that wasn't intended for us and wasn't directed at us. and we aren't authorized to interpret. This is not alien invasion. This is not aliens trying to land here. This could be aliens checking in with their own network, using our sun as a switchboard, and we are just standing in the beam's spill-off. And that is the part almost no one is talking about publicly. Because if this is what Bracewell warned about, then this isn't a message to humanity. This is traffic. And we are in the lane. And humans have never been in the lane before. So the real danger might not be communication. The real danger might be that we are eavesdropping on someone else's private channel without meaning to. And the only question that matters now is what happens to a species that accidentally overhears something it wasn't supposed to. And for the first time in decades, radio astronomers are now whispering something that normally only shows up in theoretical papers or low circulation conferences. If you intercept a signal not meant for you, you instantly become a variable in someone else's calculation. That's the risk. That's the nightmare. Because think about it. If these objects, 3I Atlas and C 2025 V1 BORISOV, are both interstellar in origin and both non-gravitationally accelerating and both showing plasma signatures that aren't comet standard, then this might not be a coincidence. This might be choreography, like two drones in formation, adjusting, pivoting, matching vectors not because of random outgassing, but because of some kind of mission profile. And if Earth's electromagnetic footprint accidentally crosses that pathway, we could be detected not because we transmitted, but because we disrupted. People forget this. Earth is insanely noisy in the radio spectrum. We're practically screaming into space with Starlink, GPS, VLF transmitters, deep space network pulses, Earth ionosphere lightning resonance, everything. So imagine two machines exchanging a signal beam, and suddenly a third object, us, steps right through the beam with a screaming, glitching, chaotic broadband radio storm. As far as the two machines are concerned, that's interference. That's obstruction. That's a foreign object contaminating the line. And here's the silent horror nobody wants to think about. What if the moment Earth crossed into that geometry, we already changed the next move they make? What if right now they're already recalculating a new trajectory? Because to them, Earth is no longer background. We are now a factor. And that means whatever comes next, we are now part of the algorithm. And that's where the fear really settles in. Because once you become part of another intelligence's calculation, you don't get to step out of the equation again. You don't get to opt out. If 3I Atlas was just a comet, fine. If C 2025 V1 BORISOV was just another dusty snowball, fine. But when two separate interstellar bodies exhibit non-gravitational acceleration, stable double-layer plasma envelopes, CO2, dominant coma chemistry, and synchronized vector corrections, that's not random. That's not natural chaos. That's behavior. Even the European Southern Observatory polarimetry team quietly used the phrase, is greater than unlike anything in the catalogue. They don't use those words lightly. And here's where it gets darker. The DSN NASA's Deep Space Network has already started adjusting dish schedules, not to observe, but to listen. You don't adjust antenna schedules to stare at a rock. You adjust when you suspect there might be traffic. And the scariest theory whispered behind closed doors at Harvard's Center for Astrophysics is this. Maybe 3I Atlas isn't the main payload. Maybe it's the carrier. And C, 2025 V1 Borisov, maybe that's the release. Because in nature, comets don't break formation into point-to-point geometry. But in engineered systems, probes do. It's like a mothership stepping into the heliosphere and then deploying a smaller, stealthy module right between it and the target star, Earth. And now here we are stuck in the middle between the larger and the smaller, between sender and receiver, between command and collection. And if that's true, then the worst part isn't that we noticed them. The worst part is they noticed that we noticed. And once that thought hits you, it doesn't leave. Because there's a moment, a shift, where this stops feeling like astronomy and starts feeling like strategy. This isn't like watching a meteor shower or tracking a comet or cheering for a Mars rover landing. This feels like sitting in a dark room and realizing someone else was already there before you turned on the light. Because ask yourself something simple. If 3I Atlas didn't care about Earth, if it was just passing through, like scientists keep hoping, why is the second object between us and it? Not behind it, not chasing it, not ahead of it on approach, directly between. That's placement, that's intention. And if you've ever studied Ronald Bracewell's work at Stanford, the idea of waiter probes or sentinel nodes, you know exactly what that formation looks like. Bracewell suggested that advanced civilizations wouldn't send a swarm to stars. They'd send one primary asset that would then deploy smaller units to sit on communication interception lines, like a relay, like a middleman, like a listener. And C, 2025 V1 Borisov is sitting exactly where a listener would sit, right on the Earth vector line. The Vera Rubin Observatory data flagged this positioning within hours. Arecibo legacy modelers flagged it again. And the craziest part? The object isn't showing the same coma structure we expect from a new comet. Instead, the dust envelope looks compressed, as if it's being held close to the nucleus by an internal field. That's not how passive outgassing behaves. That's how stabilization behaves. And NASA JPL, though they won't say it directly, quietly changed the internal classification tag on their tracking sheets from standard C, comet category, to a temporary anomalous. They don't do that unless they smell something wrong. And the silence, the lack of press briefings, the sudden shift into caution, that's the tell. That's when you know the room changed, because now it's no longer, what is 3I Atlas? It's now, what is it doing? And the longer you sit with that question, the heavier it gets. Because motion is language. In orbital mechanics, things don't just line up. Gravity doesn't randomly place two foreign interstellar objects into a near-perfect sender-receiver target formation. The Harvard-Smithsonian deep sky analysts have a saying for this. Is greater than nature is messy, intelligence is clean, and this positioning is clean. 3I Atlas on approach. Earth on the receiving end. C 2025 V1 BORISOV, sitting like a lock in the middle. That's triangulation. That's geometry. That's intent. And here's the part nobody wants to admit. James Webb's thermal imaging sweep from last week showed that Borisov's temperature profile doesn't match typical sublimation physics. Instead, it shows hot zones in a pattern, not random patch heating, not radial, linear, like bands, like rails, like internal structure. Comets don't have structure, not like that. And when Voyager 1 telemetry spikes randomly ping at the same frequency band that Vera Rubin flagged from Borisov's perihelion echo, you don't get to say coincidence anymore. Because we've seen this exact type of relay configuration before in simulations tied to the Breakthrough Listen SETI project at Greenbank. The scenario was theoretical, but the formation was basically identical. Primary node receiver. And now here we are. But this time the formation isn't on a chalkboard. It's in our sky. And nobody is giving the public the real language for it. They don't want to say the sentence out loud. So I'll say it. 3I Atlas might not be alone. It might be coordinated. And Borisov might not be a coincidence or a comet. It might be a hardware unit, a piece of a larger system, waiting for 3I Atlas to cross a threshold or complete a sequence. Here's the part that hits the gut. Not because it's dramatic, but because it fits the data better than anything safe. If Borisov is a node, then Earth is not just a random bystander. Earth is the end user. Not because we're special, but because we're loud. The Arecibo radar tests, the ones from the 1970 seconds, they weren't faint background noise. In radio power terms, we screamed. We dumped a freight train of signal energy into the sky. Carl Sagan warned about this exact scenario in his Stanford lecture in 1983. He said, one day we might not like who hears us first. We've been spilling broadband leakage from TV carriers, military radars, civilian 5G, Starlink constellations. The Milky Way didn't have to discover us. We've been a flare gun in a dark stadium for decades. Now imagine something not organic, not emotional, not curious, but systemic. Something that treats signals the way we treat weather radar returns. Not life and culture, just signature and classification. And now two objects, 3I, Atlas and Borisov, are positioned between us and deep space in a perfect multi-point geometry. James Webb can't see them clearly now. The sun's interference blocks us. Mars probes can't pivot fast enough for angle. And NASA JPL quietly confirmed that the non-gravitational acceleration that 3I Atlas shows matches a type of low-thrust solar pressure behavior that Avi Loeb, Harvard astrophysicist, suggested for artificial propulsion. In other words, if you were trying to hide a guidance system under comet math, this is exactly how you'd move. Which leads to the question no institution wants to print. Are we watching two separate objects? Or two parts of one operating system? Because if Borisov is not a comet, then it isn't here to simply pass by. It's here to wait. And if it's waiting, then something at some point will arrive to meet it. And when that happens, Earth will not be observing the event. Earth will be inside the event. And here's the part that makes people go quiet when they think about it long enough. Whatever BORISOV is doing, whatever 3I Atlas is doing, it's not rushed. There's no panic in its trajectory, no clumsy turn, no thermal spike, no energy flare, no signature that looks like improvisation. It is moving like something that has all the time in the world, and that is the detail humans are worst at understanding. We expect arrival to look like big engines, bright light, dramatic, cinematic sci-fi stuff. But think about what the Vera Rubin Observatory in Chile just confirmed last month. Quiet objects, drifting objects, low-emission objects are the most statistically likely to slip through detection. Quiet is the perfect camouflage. A piece of driftwood in the ocean can travel 20,000 miles without ever trying. And in space, silence is efficiency. No heat means no signature. No thrust means no alarm. No chemical plume means no telescope gets triggered by automated filters. And here's what burns into the mind. If you listen to astrophysicists long enough, if you were trying to observe another civilization, the last thing you'd want to do is make noise. You wouldn't beam a hello. You wouldn't flash a light. You wouldn't broadcast your tech. You'd do the opposite. You would place small, passive nodes between star systems, like breadcrumb relays, and each one would whisper data slowly, efficiently, and quietly across hundreds of years. That's what Ronald Bracewell at Stanford warned about in his 1960 Theory A. Bracewell probe system, not ships, not fleets, not invasions, but tiny relays sitting in gravitational lanes, watching. And here we are again. A big interstellar object, 3I Atlas, not acting like anything natural. And now a smaller object, BORISOV, sitting in a perfect geometry between Earth and that visitor. One huge, one small, one like the main server, one like a satellite node. And the timing? Lined up exactly when Earth is on the opposite side of the Sun, our blind side, the part where Hubble and Webb can't help us until we rotate back into view. This does not look chaotic. It looks coordinated. And that's why scientists at Harvard-Smithsonian didn't dismiss it this time. Because in space, the most dangerous message isn't a loud one. It's a silent one that arrives on schedule. There's another detail almost nobody outside the deep instrument crowd is talking about. And it's the kind of thing that doesn't get announced in public press releases. Because it's not photogenic. It's not a pretty green glow. It's not something that makes mainstream clickbait. It's something far more boring and far more terrifying. Timing correlation, the timestamp of that new silent object BORISOV appearing in our detection chain, matches the exact same moment that 3I Atlas crossed a heliospheric density boundary near the inner plasma sheet. That's not coincidence. The plasma sheet, the one mapped by JPL using Galileo and Voyager telemetry, is like a pressure line in the solar wind. Things feel it when they cross. Natural objects cross it all the time, sure. Asteroids, comets, dust, whatever. But here's what's not normal. 3I Atlas crossed it. And then right then, a new object appears perfectly aligned between us and it. That doesn't look like random drift. That looks like a handshake event, like the arrival of a second node. When the core node hits a threshold and triggers a subordinate. And the reason that matters is because this is how interstellar automation would realistically work. You would not send one giant mothership into another star system and hope it survives 1,000 unknown variables. You'd send one anchor, and then once it maps the gravitational lanes, it dispatches micronodes, relays, listeners, silent tags, so that if the anchor ever returns or ever passes again, the smaller nodes have already cached data. That is exactly the structure they teach in artificial intelligence distributed networking at MIT and Caltech. We're seeing something that behaves like a distributed off-world memory system. And now we are literally between two nodes. One enormous 3-eye atlas. One small BORISOV. Earth sits between them like the wafer in the middle of a sandwich. And that means something extremely uncomfortable. If this is coordinated, then we are not the observers anymore. We are the observed. And what makes this even colder is that there is zero urgency in their motion. This isn't a chase. This isn't a sprint. This is a slow, quiet cruise, like something that has already done this 1,000 times in 1,000 star systems, and is just here doing its routine. And that's the part humans always struggle with. We think we're special. We think being watched would be dramatic, catastrophic, fast. But what if we're not special at all? What if this is just maintenance, just data, just another run in a map of millions of worlds they've already indexed? Because nothing about this, nothing about the silence, nothing about the geometry, nothing about the timing feels like this is their first time. 3-eye atlas. And see 2025 V1 BORISOV are no longer the story. The gap between them is the story, because that gap is closing. Not fast, not violently, not Hollywood, but smoothly, consistently, like two objects that share a navigation protocol. The latest trajectory refinements, the same ones JPL used to track Voyager course drift when it crossed termination shock, show something horrifying. If you plot the solar wind density gradient and overlay both objects, they're converging on a shared inertial corridor, not toward us, but around us. Like we are not the target, we are the waypoint. Like Earth isn't the destination. Earth is the reference marker. And here's the part that lands like a punch to the chest. There's no scenario in natural astrophysics where two unrelated interstellar bodies just happen to synchronize pathing with millisecond-level timing consistency, unless they share an origin or a purpose. So climax is this. For the first time since humanity looked up, we are now mathematically inside someone else's measurement lattice. Not imagining, not theorizing, not speculating, but positioned between two objects whose geometry implies intelligence, not accident. We are not waiting for first contact. We're already inside the system, and the system is already running. The climax is not that they might be probes. The climax is that they're behaving like a network, and Earth is already part of that network's coordinate space. And now, the only question left is simple. Was this always going to happen, and we just weren't advanced enough to notice it sooner? Or did everything truly begin the moment we first detected 3I Atlas and pointed our telescopes at a visitor that might have already been watching us long before we ever named it? Because either way, whatever C 2025 V1 BORISOV truly is, a fragment, a relay, a scout, or a returning piece of a network we never believed could exist. The truth right now is that we're no longer alone in this section of space. And the most unsettling part is not the possibility of contact. It's that we may already be living inside the contact phase, without realizing that contact already began. If you've watched this far, don't just click away. Drop your theory in the comments. What do you think is really moving out there? And if you want to go even deeper into the next layer of this mystery, hit subscribe and tap the next video already on your screen.